You know what it is. Appreciate y'all tuning in. This is the G podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future. And everything else you heard. This is the G podcast. Welcome back. Thank y'all for returning. Thank y'all for tuning in for the very first time. This is the G podcast. If you haven't been tuning in, this is something that you probably never heard before, all right? Very open, honest, critical thought on what I've been through, using that as a tool, a mechanism to not only give voice to others who are in similar situations, also give light to what others might not know is possible. There are a lot of possibilities out there, okay? I'm just here to share my perspective. I think at least in my opinion, one of the big mistakes, or I would say missteps that I see with a lot of podcasts are that people get up and they talk about things in which they have no experience. It's just commentary, opinions without any actual experience in what they're speaking on. You know, it's commentary. And so I don't want to just provide commentary on things in which I don't have much experience with. I want to speak from my personal experiences, things that I have spent time, or I should say, taking more time to get to understand throughout my life. I'm not here to really comment on things that I can't speak from a place of truth and honesty on. That makes this G podcast a little different. And if you haven't seen the previous episodes, I would encourage you to tune in. Just gives you a little bit more background about me and why, I would say more so how I got to do this, how I ended up doing this, excuse me. When I say that one of the worst decisions that you can make is buying or investing in a timeshare, I truly mean that. That is one of the worst things that you can do. Please, please do not waste your time.
No.
Timeshares are trash, okay? Please, please do not waste your time investing in timeshares. I cannot say this enough. You might say, man, why are you so passionate or adamant about not having a timeshare? Who doesn't want a cool place to stay in a nice location? I get it. I fell for it too. Don't do it. Don't do it.
No.
Don't do it. All right. When I say that it's one of the worst decisions, especially from a financial standpoint. Now, don't get me wrong. If you are in a position where that cost doesn't have really, like, it's not a thing for you and it doesn't bother you that you're throwing that into that sinking sort of investment, that's on you. And so I wouldn't argue with that. There is an audience where maybe it might make sense, maybe. But I think it's one of the worst decisions you can make because there are other implications outside of the financial agreement that just don't fall on you if you have a family. Talk about that more. This is a true story. It's going to be story time. So I would say get comfortable. And when I say it's story time now, based on a true story is one thing. But these are facts. This is some G shit. These are facts. This is how I know it's one of the worst decisions you can make. So if you go against my advice, that's on you. And if you're looking for advice on what to do if you currently own one, get rid of it immediately.
No.
I cannot tell you enough. Don't do it. When you are in a bad deal, this is just something you have to accept from a business perspective. When you're in a bad deal, there's no other thing to do but then to get out of the deal. If the deal is bad, you must get out of the deal. So if it's a bad deal, you don't stay in a bad deal and hope that it changes. You have to get out of a bad deal. Timeshares are a bad deal. So I'm going to share my experience, how I even fell into the trap of signing that dotted line, how it even got introduced in the first place, because it wasn't like I went looking for it. This is the power of sales, by the way, right? Because people don't necessarily know what they want always. So if you're a good salesperson, you have an opportunity to, I don't want to say trick people, but you can use your powers for good and you can use your powers for evil. Timeshares are evil. Okay. So, gonna go over how all that happened. Gonna talk about what it was like to actually own it and why we ended up ultimately saying, look, we have to figure out how to get rid of this thing. And I say we because I was not alone. That's when if I could cue that Michael Jackson, you are not alone. I'm here with you. Shout out to MJ, man. I definitely couldn't get that sample. You know they coming after me if I played that. All right, so going to talk about what it was like to own that thing. And man, how difficult it is to try and get out. It is a very tough thing to get out of. But even more, there's more. And I'll just have to speak to that because even when you own it and like something happens to you, you're not necessarily off the hook. Or maybe you're off the hook, but the people you care about, you could have just set them up. We'll talk about all of this. Timeshares are evil. Bobby Boucher's mama would call it the devil. Okay. If you own a timeshare, please leave your thoughts in the comments. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm pausing because there's a lot of sirens happening. I'm just making sure it's not like right outside, because that's how Durham kind of is. It's like stuff happens randomly, like right outside. All right, we good. This idea of the timeshare, it all started when my wife and I were leaving Mexico, moving to DC. That was somewhere where we would stay before we went to Amsterdam. And so we were in Mexico. I had stayed in Mexico for maybe 9 months or so. And it was time to leave. When it was time to leave, that's when, in the foreign service, when you go from one post to the next, there's typically like a gap or a time period where you get to go back home to the States, do family stuff, see people, get a few visits in. And at the time, between where my mom is in North Carolina and my wife's parents were not, they were other places. And at the time, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was in, let's say, Southern California. And so we went and visited in Southern California. It was around Thanksgiving. Yes, it was around Thanksgiving 2014, to be exact. So we're in Southern Cal, and while being there, visiting, this is my maybe second time in LA, but my first time as like an adult. So, of course, I'm indulging in all what LA has to offer, all the recreational. And I had an opportunity to go to a Laker game. So my wife and I, we ended up going to see Kobe, Staples Center. And this was around Thanksgiving 2014. Feel free to fact check me, but I am honored to have not only seen Kobe play in Staples. My wife and I saw Kobe get what I think was his last triple-double. And this was Kobe when like Boozer was on the Lakers, that team. And they were playing the Raptors with DeMar and Lowry. So it's that era. So we saw Kobe in Staples, great game, triple-double, and halftime or in between quarters, I can't remember exactly, we're walking that concourse. Man, I'm on cloud 9 on more ways than one. Definitely in LA with that Cali off rip. So I'm in LA, even fresh from Amsterdam. I'm like, man, this Cali is impressive. Okay? Impressive. Walking that concourse, I'm on cloud 9 because I'm watching Kobe. Come on, man. Live in Staples. This is like, I'm a kid from Durham. I'm like, man, I'm in Staples, Kobe. And we're walking around and there's a booth. I don't know how they got our attention, but they got it. Before we got to that booth, we was just kids in a candy store. Any type of promotional material, we were taking it. And so I think that's what got our attention. We was just in awe. LA, Staples, Kobe. It's like, it was a vibe. I can't lie to you. And there was a booth in there where it was a timeshare booth. And so we are, see, this is Thanksgiving 2014. My wife and I got married in maybe it was, the way I would explain this is that we got married and then had a wedding a whole year after we actually got married. We got married on the border in Texas with 2 Mexican witnesses. That's what we did in a courthouse. And then a year after that, we had a wedding where we invited family and friends to join and celebrate our union, but we didn't really tell anybody that we got married. Nobody knew when they came to the wedding outside of close family that we had already been married a year. When we had that wedding, we had a little bit of time left in Mexico. So we are in that honeymoon phase still, like pups, newlyweds, young 20s. Nobody really ever had anything before. And we're in Staples Center, and these people are like, do you want a free trip to a vineyard? What do you think? Like, what are you talking about? That's a no-brainer. I want a free trip to the vineyard every single offer. Oh yeah, give me that free trip. But there's a catch. There's a catch. It's not just here's a free trip. You got to do something first. You have to do something first. And that's where they get you. And so we sign up, get the tickets, and it requires us going to this location. I'm not even going to mention the actual name and actual location of the timeshare, but I'll say Southern California. And we did go to that vineyard. I'll tell you the city, that was, I think, Temecula. Went to that vineyard. It was nice. I have to admit, it was a nice little experience, little scenery vibe, grape trees and shit like that, whatever you call it. And again, I'm from Durham, man. I had all of this is like, cannot like, come on, man. So I'm just enjoying it. Can't tell me nothing. And at this time period as well, like when you're in the foreign service, you don't have to pay for housing. And on top of that, before we moved from the border, my wife and I, we sold both of our cars. So we didn't have any car payment. We didn't have any housing. We just had life. And it was a very unique time period. And so that also influenced like the willingness to just do things because so many of your needs are taken care of when you're in that foreign service lifestyle. You have quality housing and it's taken care of, and it changes how you can maneuver, in my opinion, when you don't have to actually pay those things regularly. So we're in LA at the Staples, took the tickets, went to Temecula, did the whole stay, stayed in some random place, and then ended up at the timeshare spot. And don't get me wrong, the location itself is like a nice location. It looks nice. Like when you're driving through the property, you're like, wow, this is pretty nice. You're in Southern California though, so everything is nice. It's a beautiful part of the United States. Just driving from, say, like San Diego north to LA and upward, like that drive is just a beauty. And when we arrived, man, their whole process of bringing you in, putting you in certain places, taking way too much of your time is crazy. It's a very aggressive and frankly, we'll get to this. It's a fraudulent way to do business. It's a deceptive way to do business. And that sales organization, you can use your powers for good and evil, right? A fire can burn a house down or it can heat it up. as salespeople, you can't be one of these evil salespeople who just use your powers to take advantage of people when they shouldn't be using their resources to do certain things, like where it's to their detriment. You as a salesperson should not be going out of your way to hurt people. That's a terrible practice. And unfortunately, this place, that's what they made their money on. Just making sure that regardless of the situation, they lock you in. And the unfortunate thing about how they do this is, again, it's very deceptive. They'll try to pitch you on ownership, saying you get to own something. But here's the thing about owning a timeshare. You don't own anything. What you own is a duty to pay this company X amount of money on a monthly basis. And what you own is a duty to then spend X amount of money on a yearly, if not biannually basis for a quote unquote maintenance fee. It's different. Random maintenance fees too. They random and they're not cheap. They're not cheap. We're talking, thousands potentially. And so they try to sell you on this idea of a timeshare being an actual real estate investment. That's what they try to do. And when you are being tricked, see, this is why I say this, you have to be careful with this myth of generational wealth and et cetera, because a lot of people lose everything with just one silly decision. When you don't have the education, when you don't have the support system or the resources to overcome certain decisions, like one ignorant decision can bury you in the United States. That's the thing. The U.S. is so, I'm going a little, the U.S. is so crazy. The U.S. is so crazy because they prey on your ignorance. You can make tons of money and build a successful business from the ground up. The American dream. But America will penalize you and take everything from you when you didn't do those taxes the right way. Regardless of if you knew what to do, didn't know what to do, intentionally, purposefully, that's how America is like set up. It's not necessarily, it's about what you know. And ignorance will hurt you so often when you, especially here. You can't afford to be ignorant to the realities of how this thing works. And unfortunately, especially for people who look like me, when we make decisions and suffer the consequences of that liability of ignorance, it can be detrimental. And we don't get second, third, fourth chances. It's tough to bounce back sometimes. So getting this information ahead of time, I think, is important, which is one of the reasons why I'm sharing this story. But America, man, it unfortunately, it preys on the ignorance, the asymmetry of information within the dynamic. That's negotiation, that's business, that's anywhere where it requires me having an advantage over you. There's always a game being played where the information is not equal. And when you have more information, you have an advantage. So they preyed on our ignorance. Because we were definitely and still are of the mindset that real estate is important and you must have it. But where we went wrong was, we thought, given our lifestyle at the time, we didn't know that at that time, we didn't know that we weren't going to be trying to figure out how to build a life. And with my wife working in the foreign service at that time, we weren't thinking that, okay, 3 years from now, we won't be doing this. We were in the mindset at that point that we'll be doing this for a very long time. And so even though we had that mindset, it didn't necessarily mean that we were right, and we weren't right. But we thought at the time, oh yeah, one, we're going to be in this lifestyle built around living in different places that we have really no idea where. And her mother at the time stayed in Southern California. So why not have a timeshare in Southern California where we just come visit for at least a week or so every year? It's like, oh, it makes so much sense. And it's ownership and it's an investment. And they also get you by saying, yeah, in the times you don't want to spend, you can just do other things. Like when certain conventions are in town, you can trade it in or sell your points or do all this other stuff. It's like, they just make it seem like it's just so like, oh man, this is such a great choice, right? Now, again, young, had never been nowhere, had never done nothing. And this is my first time in LA. And everything was great. Went and saw Kobe, went to a vineyard. You know what I'm saying? I think we went to we went back. We had the place we stayed, we had got a little massages to come to the room, get the massages happening, man. It was all right little time. I have to say, all right little time. And then we get there to the timeshare and they show us around. They like, man, we thinking this thing out. We're like, yeah, this makes sense. Man, they make it seem like you just won a lottery, man. It's like a whole picture of you, like, boom, take the picture, print it out, give you like a whole applaud, a little champagne. Like you could just close on a house. You know, it's crazy that it's this whole sort of, I don't know what you call it, trick and pony, or this whole sort of like show though. It's like this road show. And it's very much a deceptive way of trying to sell something that ultimately has a lot more what I would consider downsides than plus sides. And when we ask questions, frankly, we didn't get honest answers to our questions. They just said what they needed to say. But we didn't know at the time, like, how do you know when you ask someone a question, like, how do you know that they're not being honest, that they're deceiving you just to get the sale? Like, this idea of trust and everything, it's like, how do you just know, like, this person is just not being honest? They're being deceptive. When you don't have much information or knowledge about timeshares in general. I'm telling you now, don't do it. If you do take up the offer to get that free experience, which I can respect, have the power to just do the free and walk away. Don't let them get you. Don't let them get you. Don't let them put you on a golf cart. Walk, leave on your own will, because they'll take you somewhere where it's like you got to figure out where to go back. You be like, I parked over here. Then we got on a cart. We rode over here. Like, dang, where are we? They trying to show you all around it and loop you around in a circle. You lost. Then walked you around the whole little property. You lost. So don't do it. But I can't knock a hustler for taking that free trip, that free dinner, that free gift. Hey, look, they got some enticing little incentives to take the meeting, so you just listen to the presentation. After we had this thing, we ended up going to Amsterdam. And again, we had sold our cars, we're not paying for rent. So it's like, okay, not that bad of an expense. So I'm gonna be honest, when we were in Amsterdam, we ended up like doing this trade thing where instead of using our points to go travel at the timeshare location in Southern California, we went to southern Spain, Costa del Sol, and when we went to southern Spain and Costa del Sol, it was, hold on just one second here, because southern Spain, we stayed there for a week, Marbella. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but it was Marbella. We stayed there for a week. And so that was a cool experience. And we got to do that in part because we had this timeshare and it was able to swap out. But here's the thing, you're paying this monthly fee every month. And then all of a sudden, when it's time to use what you have, you got to pay more. It's like, well, why am I paying every month if I got to pay again when it's time to actually go somewhere? So it didn't make a lot of sense. I have to say, it just didn't make a lot of sense. That was like the first sign of like, man, this is kind of trash. Like, haven't we been paying every month? Like, shouldn't we just be able to go stay for wherever, like without paying? Like, that's the whole point. You pay every month, so you always have somewhere to stay without quote unquote paying. But that's not true. It's not true at all. And so when we were in Amsterdam and didn't have like bills, the timeshare wasn't really bothering what we were doing. But then we moved and came back home to the States. And my wife's mother moved from Southern California. So now it's like we really don't have this need for this thing there because we're not going to be going there as often as we thought, just off the principle of family being there. And so then we started asking ourselves, like, man, how do we just get rid of this thing? And that's when it was like, oh man, whole other can of worms. This is why I say just don't do it. Because it's a decision that if you say all of a sudden you don't want to do it anymore, it's not going to be easy to just not do it anymore. It's a huge financial obligation. And let's say something were to happen to you after you sign that timeshare. Whoever is your next of kin, according to that contract, they are going to be responsible for taking up the contract. It gets passed along. It doesn't end. Like, it's going to get passed along and somebody's going to be responsible for dealing with that. A very terrible thing to sign. And so we start asking ourselves, like, man, what can we do to get out of this thing? It's tough. You're going to need a lawyer. One, and it's going to be expensive. Two. So not only is the timeshare just a terrible financial decision on the fact that you're paying this monthly cost, month over month over month. You're paying this maintenance fee year over year over year. And when you actually go stay somewhere, you have to spend more money. It's crazy. And you don't own any property. Like You're not getting any equity into the company, into the value of the place. Like, you don't own anything. All you do is own a debt. That's it. It is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing for people to consume. And if you don't have money just to waste, like, I would not even give this consideration. When we figured out that this was no bueno, excuse me. When we figured out this was no bueno, we started looking into how do you get out of these things? And that's when you start to find out that it's kind of impossible. And so was listening to the radio, Universe talking to me, commercial on the radio. I never listened to the radio. Like, the commercial came on the radio. Hey, you trying to get out of a timeshare deal? Call 1-800 da 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 da. I was like, I'm so desperate to get out of this thing. I'm calling 1-800 da 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 da. Man. So we call this company to get us out of this deal. That's when we find out that to get out of the timeshare, it's going to cost several thousands of dollars just to even put it in motion. And it's not even like a guarantee that they're going to get a result. Essentially, what you end up facing is, if you want to get out of a timeshare and you call one of these entities that allege to specialize in doing that, what they do is they find people like myself at the time or others who own and are trying to get out, and they bring them in, and then they take their money, and then from there, they're the middleman to then go find them a lawyer for their case. So they'll bring them in, they'll hear your story, they'll qualify you, get your information, da 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 da. And based off your information and your scenario, what you owe, et cetera, they'll say, okay, it's going to cost based off like this scale or chart or rubric or however they formulate what the cost of the service is. And then what from there is they say, okay, it's going to cost this. And they can't guarantee a result, but they say it's going to cost this. And then from there, they take your money, and then they have law firms that they tend to work with, in which these law firms specialize in this sort of negotiation, getting out of timeshare contracts and so forth. So when I say it costs thousands of dollars, like, it's definitely like a decent used car. Let's be clear. But again, too, when you're in a bad deal, you just got to get out. You don't weather the storm. When you're in a bad deal, you don't weather the storm. You have to get out. Even if that costs you, you're better off just paying the cost to not have to deal with it long term than thinking that it's not worth it to pay the cost and then just keep paying it little by little over a significant period of time. If you're in a bad deal, you got to find ways to get out. When we paid these people to get out of the timeshare, and then they handed us off to the lawyer, this is where stuff was starting to get a little spooky. Because the lawyer was like, man, we don't normally take cases like this. We're like, well, they took that money. So I don't know what you mean by that.
No.
You're going to take this case because they took that bread and they said that you could deliver a result. So the lawyer was basically like, typically to get out of these timeshare things, there's a term. So when you sign to pay X amount of money over X amount of time. So it might be X amount of money over 5 years, 10 years, etc. I don't remember our exact term, I want to say, I do not remember the exact term. Might have, I don't, it couldn't have been. I want to say ignorantly, it might have been 10 because as I think about it, it was like, yeah, this was we realized how silly of a decision it was after the fact. After we actually purchased our first house and done some other things, we're like, man, we need to get rid of this thing immediately. This is not a good thing for the household. So we spent that money. The lawyer came to us and we were just at a standstill for months because the lawyer's basically like, look, you owe so much and you have so long left. They're used to dealing with people who maybe their parents passed and they are on the contract, but they are only on the hook for maintenance fees, not the monthly fee. Or people who are toward the end. Again, if something happens to you, the contract doesn't end there. Somebody else gets the responsibility, which is terrible. And so we didn't know how we were going to get out of this. And this is why I say it's a terrible decision because your ability to control how you get out of it is just not really within your control. You have to go through so many hoops and hurdles, and it is expensive, very expensive. It's costly on so many levels. So just don't even do it. That's all I can keep saying. All of a sudden, something happened. And what took place was there happened to be like a class action lawsuit taking place against this company in which we purchased the timeshare regarding their fraudulent or misguided, misleading sales practices. There was a huge lawsuit, a class action suit. Because of this class action suit that happened to be taking place, they were more inclined to just settle and deal with that. And so we were able to get our hands into that class action. And because of that, that was the thing that changed our outcome. Before this class action, we did not see a light at the end of the tunnel. When I tell you that we got a call out of the blue, I mean, we got a call completely out of the blue. Had no expectation that this was going to get solved anytime soon because they kept giving us runaround. We felt like we got again. We're like, but they did have, the company had a policy where if the result wasn't delivered, they refund X amount of the money. So we was like, okay, well, at least that's the case. But then you find out that's not even necessarily the case. So you live and learn, man. America preys on your ignorance, and your ignorance will cost you money. You need to have the money to pay for your ignorance. And you need to have the money to pay for lawyers if you want to make sure you're able to put yourself in position to be successful long term. Do you have money for lawyers? And that is on so many levels. So many levels. You need money for lawyers because these are the people who can really get you out of these ignorant jams instead of suffering major consequences. Not just major, it's a timeshare. So you might not say it's major, but financially, I mean, when you're check to check or something happens to you and you got this cost and you can't get rid of it, that could break you potentially, bankrupt you. So could have a major impact, but they prey on your ignorance. So you have to be careful and you want to make knowledgeable decisions and acknowledge when you don't know and you're being ignorant. Do your research. Be patient. Make sure you're confident with your decision versus just falling victim to the moment. When it comes to like emotionally driven decisions, like think it through. Do your research. And when it comes to the timeshare, just don't do it. If it wasn't for this class action suit, even though we paid for this service, had a lawyer and all these other things, without the class action, the outcomes were not favorable for us. It did not look good. So how we got out? Mercy, grace, universe, just blessed to have that fall how it fell and the stars align how they align. And we got out scot-free and didn't owe them another dime. That was... Yeah, that's a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact.
Wow.
Amazed. Okay. So that is the only way we got out. So happy we got out. And in retrospect, the money spent to get out of the deal was worth it. It was worth it. If you're in a bad deal, get out of it. However you got to do that. Well, let me step back. Not however you got to do that, but if it requires spending a little money or money up front to avoid spending more over a period of time, eat the cost now, get out of the deal immediately. Do your best. That's it, man. I cannot say it enough. Timeshares are one of the worst decisions that you can make. Don't fall victim to it. These are not investments. They're not appreciating over time. They're not giving you anything of value. And if you are someone who enjoys traveling, you're better off just saving your money consistently than spending money on a timeshare. That would be my honest opinion. Stack your bread off to the side in some type of account or whatever that you use to spend when you travel. And the amount of money that you're going to spend monthly on a timeshare, when you look at that at the end of a year, even if it is on the lower end, I want to say, just to give a round number, even if it is $250 a month, you look at that over the course of a year, and then you look at these maintenance fees that cost a couple, maybe like $2,000 or so every other year. It's like by the time you pay that monthly fee, pay that maintenance fee, you could have just used that same money and done something else in a place where you enjoy yourself. So don't do it. It's not an investment. Don't let those aggressive sales tactics take advantage of you. They'll literally try and whirl you, confuse you, woo you like it is a sensory overload to make you feel just confused. Don't fall victim for it. I cannot say it enough. Avoid the headache. Those timeshares are not worth it. This is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future. And everything else.
Fire final system check for re-entry. Uh-oh. Looks like you got off course there, G. I don't think you'll ever come back the same way.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
Appreciate y'all watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't be afraid to engage. If you got a timeshare, tell me what your experience is. Please tell me what you think. Like, what have you gone through? Anything similar to me? Have you found it frustrating that you own it? I'd be curious to hear how many people out there are actually happy with the fact that they own a timeshare. I'd love to hear a different perspective. Once again, peace and love. This is G, the G Podcast.